Second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. James Baxter, and the issue is African Americans in public education. And of course, Dr. Baxter, I think in your overview,
yes,
during that first segment, you sort of laid out the situation that at least one African American faced
sure,
in public education, and how you have been able to overcome.
Right.
But in many instances, a large number of Africans have not been able to overcome, as the two of us have, for example.
Yes.
And so what we'd like to do is to start at the period immediately after slavery and talk about some of the education options that Africans had at that particular time.
Well, very good. In doing so, Dr. Haney, the year January the 1st, 1862, is very important in these United States of America, and especially for people of color. On that particular date, Abraham Lincoln issued by executive order Emancipation Proclamation. Now, what that particular executive order did for people of color, it freed them. And only those who were in areas of the South and borderline states that had been conquered by Union forces. Now, after January 1st, 1862, at the end of the war, the country is faced with a dilemma in that the war was fought, for the most part, in the southern region of the United States of America. We know that the economy of the South was based on agriculture. We also know that cotton had been king. We also know that Eli Whitney revolutionized the cotton industry with his invention of the cotton gin. It made for cotton to be what? Mass produced. Now, when we think in terms of growing and harvesting cotton, you needed a suitable a labor force.
Amen. So
slavery was on its deathbed. And the founding fathers, those who were delegates at the Constitutional Convention, that's why they did not abolish slavery then, because they knew that slavery was on its deathbed because it could not be mass produced. So they gave it 20 years from 1787, and slavery would no longer exist because the cotton could not be mass produced. But Eli Whitney invented this cotton gin. So now there is a need for continued slave labor. So therefore you have these slaves working on plantations of the South. They were forbidden to know how to read and write. It was against the order of the day for anyone to teach slaves to read and write. Slave masters used the Bible to justify that institution of slavery. Well, after January 1 comes an Emancipation Proclamation. Then, of course, the Civil War comes to an end. The dilemma of the South is such as this. You have now emancipated 3.5 million slaves. All they've ever known has been this particular institution, formerly known as slavery. Now, what do we do? The federal government is posed with this problem. What do we now do with 3.5 million plus freedmen?
Okay.
Where will they go? Where will they live? Well, when we look at them, some of them left the plantation for the most part. Some of them traveled the country. They went west, they went east. So many stayed on the plantation or stayed in the South, and they also went north. Then, of course, there were those who received education in the north because of those who were part of northern missionary societies taught them how to read and how to write. This education that was given to some of those individuals in the North gave rise for individuals such as Phyllis Wheatley, Sojourner Truth, Benjamin Banneker. So we do have freed men and women becoming educated. Well, then we now move then into the period known as what? Reconstruction.
Good.
The radical Republicans in Congress, when the federal government took over, when congressional Reconstruction began in the South due to some problems with the Lincoln Plan, the Johnson Plan, Congress begins to make radical changes in the South in order to protect 3.5 million plus former slaves. Well, they established what becomes known as the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau did not only service the freedmen, but we must understand that there was a large underclass of poor whites in the South. They could not read. They could not write. The only people who were educated in the South were the children of Southern aristocracy, slave masters. They had the money, Dr. Haney. They would send their sons and daughters to the Northeast to attend the elementary schools there. And then for the formal training, they could send them to the other fluent colleges and universities in the Northeast, and some even sent their sons and daughters to be trained in Europe for the higher education. Now, when we look then at the Freedmen's Bureau, they established schools for poor whites as well as the freedmen. Now, when we also look at the education of freedmen, the missionary societies from the North, they too came south to further educate the freedmen and poor whites. Not only that, blacks saw the need to take care of one another by way of the black church. As black churches were established, the AME Church, the CME Church, Independent Baptist Church, our churches saw the need to further educate the freedmen in the South. So then it gave rise to church established colleges who later become universities, schools such as Fisk University, Lane College, Philander Smith over in your beloved Arkansas, Morehouse College, and the rest becomes history. And then, of course, as we move forward, comes the other historically black colleges and universities.
And of course, we'll stop right there for this commercial break, Dr. Baxter, but that's essentially what we want to have. It's such a poetic description in terms of what actually happened during this period. And we'll pick up at that point following this very, very short commercial break. And we'll be back with you following this very, very short commercial break.